All right, you guys, I am here. I'm going to show you how to use the RotoViz NASCAR optimizer. You can find it, of course, rotoviz.com/NASCAR-optimizer. I am Nick Giffen. You can follow me on Twitter at Rotodoc. And yeah, let's jump right into it. With the race at Pocono this weekend, qualifying is going to end about 2.5 hours before lineups lock. So I think people who use this optimizer will definitely have an edge because it'll have the machine learning model projections loaded up in there. And the machine learning model, of course, is very accurate. So one of the most accurate models, the most accurate model out there in the industry. It's built with machine learning methods, and machine learning methods are designed to be as accurate as possible. So we're going to jump right into it, and I'm going to show you how to use the multi-lineup optimizer. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to pretend we're entering in 100 lineups. And we'll pretend this is for last week's Brickyard 400 because that's what's loaded in here right now. So we're going to do 100 lineups. And the issue is if I were to just hit optimize lineups right now, the problem would be that I would create the same 100 lineups that everybody else would create if they were doing 100 lineups. So if we could do that, that's fine. Let me go ahead and hit optimize lineups, and then let's see what happens. But it'll spit out the lineups here after a minute, and it'll show the exposures. So on the exposure tab, you can see I have Kyle Larson here, 100 lineups, and then I have Keselowski 97, Joey Gase 57, Chase Elliott 56, and so forth. And since it's 100 lineups, this is also my exposure percentage. So I would have 56% Chase Elliott. So that's just using the default settings, and just that would be the way to use it if nobody else was going to use the optimizer. I think that would be a good idea, but other people are going to use the optimizer, so we need to tweak this a little bit. One of the first things I like to do, and you guys may or may not want to do this, and you may want to set it to a different number, but I like to change this number here in terms of the salary range down from 50 to like 49.9, 49.8, 7, 6, somewhere in there, so that I'm not creating lineups that are above that number. So 49,900, for example, in this case, or 49,700. My top salary lineup would be $49,700 if I did that. So I could just do that right now and show you guys what that looks like. So I'm going to hit optimize lineup. We could also, change the minimum salary range. I usually like to put it up in the mid 48s somewhere. So then let's go look and see what happens when this refreshes, because I hit that optimize lineup. It refreshed now. You could see that happened, and we've got, instead of 97, we got Keselowski in 94, trimmed off a little bit because he's a little on the expensive side. So we can come to the lineups. We can see if we sort by salary, our most expensive lineup, 49,700. Our least expensive lineup, 48,300, which is what I have in the slider there. And we can also look at the different points range projected from this model using the drivers we have here. Couple other things I wanted to point out, though, is we really don't want Joey Gase in 59% of our lineups. We also don't want BJ McLeod even in 23% of our lineups. Things like that. Those are just kind of things that we should use some common sense here. So one of the things I like to do is I like to find my bottom-most driver that I'm super comfortable with. And this week it was Eric Almirola. And then I zero out everybody else except a few drivers. So my maximum exposure percentage, you can see this is the column max percent. The maximum amount I want of any of these drivers is going to be 0% except a couple. So I wanted to keep Landon Castle in there, let's say. I wanted to keep a little bit of JJ Yaley in there. Oh, I did want BJ McLeod in there a little bit. And maybe that's about it. Let's just say that's it. So now I won't be getting just a crap ton of Joey Gase lineups. I'll be getting exactly 0 of them. But if I hit optimize lineups again, you'll see that there are still some issues. We're still going to have a lot of lineups of either like Colt Witt or Landon Castle or JJ Yaley or BJ McLeod or something like that. So when we go to the exposure tab, when it refreshes, we'll see who it jumps up. But I think it's probably going to be BJ McLeod will jump up to a decent chunk of lineups. Yeah, so BJ McLeod, 54 lineups now. We don't want that. So what we have to do is we need to lower his ownership percentage. We can do that one of two ways. We can either lower his maximum ownership percentage, which I think is perfectly reasonable, or we could change his points projection. In this case, I'm just going to lower his maximum ownership percentage. I think for McLeod, I probably don't want it any more than like 8%. So I'm just going to say 8% maximum. JJ Yaley, I liked a little more. Let's say 11% maximum. And Landon Castle, I'll just leave it there because I think with his points projection where it is at 19.43, you can see McLeod is actually priced cheaper at 22.47. And then Landon Castle is 4,800 and has more points projected at 22.47. Landon Castle priced higher has a lower projection. So if anything, the model is going to default to McLeod first until it gets to 8%, and then it'll try some Landon Castle. So now if I hit optimize lineups, we can see what happens. And this is what I'd like to do is first I'd like to just eliminate the cheap drivers or just focus on the cheap drivers I want in my lineups and remove the rest of them, because that way it's just a little bit easier to deal with the optimizer going forward. So we'll see when this refreshes what happens here. We've got BJ McLeod at 8%. We wanted a maximum of 8. We got JJ Alien a maximum of 11%. And Landon Castle ended up defaulting to 13%, even though we said he could be up to 100%. And that's because of his projection there not being a super fantastic projection. So we can, again, go through the lineups, check what's our minimum salaried one. We have a lineup here with some drivers, and none of them actually even have BJ McLeod or anything like that. So just some things we can check on. So now we've taken care kind of these cheap guys. And then we need to go up towards the expensive ones. And again, I'll recommend zeroing out anybody you don't want in your lineups this week. So for example, this week I had very little, I actually had none of Jamie McMurray, started too far forward for me. I had almost no Daniel Suarez. Let's say for this particular reason, we want it, just this example, we want 0 Daniel Suarez, 0 Austin Dillon, 0 Ryan Newman, and that'll be it for now. I think I had a little bit of Paul Menard, I had a little bit of Ty Dillon, so we'll leave it like that. So now we're at a point where I've zeroed out all the drivers I don't want, and all I have are drivers I do want. And again, I can hit the optimized lineups and see where, based off of the drivers I do want, the cheap ones and the expensive ones, I can kind of see where they fall out. And the other thing that's happened now is I'm not creating any $50,000 or $49,900 lineups. I'm only creating $49,700 and less. You might want to put $49,800, $49,900. I like to take out the $50,000 because $50,000, even $49,900, because people like to fill their lineups all the way to as much as salary as possible very often. So you'll see 50,000 is usually the most frequent number of salary per lineup that we see in each of the in these big field tournaments. And since we're focusing here on the big field tournament, if the $50,000 lineup wins, so be it, right? Like it's going to be split 800 ways anyway. We want to try to win big. So I'm going to take off the 50,000, 49,000. And so our exposure should have refreshed now. We've got all these drivers set to 0 that I zeroed out. We've got some exposures here of everybody else essentially. And what we'll see again, Kyle Larson, 99 of 100 lineups. Brad Keselowski, 85. Chris Buescher, 68. So do we really want Brad Keselowski in 85% of lineups? I wanted him maybe in like 20% of my lineups. So one thing we can do is just change his projection. We can just drop his projection. So what if I drop it to 43? Let's see what happens. And I would recommend doing this for more than one driver at a time. So I dropped Brad Keselowski's 43. I definitely want to drop Kyle Larson's projection. And one way to quickly gauge how much you should drop it is, let's say there's some drivers around him. Chase Elliott, for example, 43.58. And we have 43% Chase Elliott exposure. So if we go from 96,000 to 10,200, that's a price jump of $600. So we want a little bit more than 43.58 points. Maybe it's somewhere around 45.96 or something like that. Total guess, but we'll see what happens. So we've changed Brad Keselowski. We've dropped him by a point or two. And we've dropped Kyle Larson. And let's see if that changes their ownership percentages when I optimize lineups. So we'll come over here and we'll wait for it to refresh. But what I do think you'll see is, of course, Kyle Larson now dropped down to 53%. Brad Keselowski still at 83, so we didn't drop him far enough. So we need to drop Brad Keselowski a little bit further. And again, we can make that judgment based off of where Chase Elliott is. Chase Elliott 43.58. Brad Keselowski is actually $43.98 points projected, and he's cheaper than Elliott. So of course it's going to go heavier on him than it's going to go on Elliott. So we want him to be at least less than Elliott. So I'm going to do 42. I'm going to drop him 1.5 points from 43.98 to 42.48 and see what happens there. Then we also have Chris Buescher here at 76% ownership. Could drop his projection down if we wanted. There's all sorts of ways to tweak this. You don't necessarily have to just tweak points. You could tweak these ownership percentage numbers as well. But I like doing that a little bit less because it keeps in all of those other optimal projections. Obviously, you could tweak the ownership percentages, but I like tweaking the projections themselves because it gives me slightly different projections than everybody else will be using. So now we've got something a little more reasonable. Chase Elliott, 69% ownership. Matt Kenseth, 67. Keselowski, 66. Allmendinger, 65. Chris Buescher, 64. Still a lot of drivers in the 60s. We've also got some of the drivers I did want exposure to. Oh, actually, I didn't want any Joey Logano, so let me zero him out. But, some of the drivers we didn't want exposure to there. So like Jimmy Johnson, I'm going to need to bump his projection up because remember when I talked last week on the podcast about Jimmy Johnson, I thought he was maybe a contrarian type of dominator coming all the way back from way back there in starting 40th but qualified 4th. And he did end up wrecking out, but I did want to have some exposure to him. So one way we could do that, we could just force him in with 10% exposure, and it'll force him in at 10% exposure. And what that'll do is it'll kind of, not completely randomly, but it'll try to distribute him into 10% of the lineups, but not so he's just being put into the first 10 lineups. That way, he's not going in with just the same optimal guys whatsoever. So we could put him in at minimum 10% and do that. Another alternative thing we could do instead of that, if you wanted to take another approach, is we can see Kyle Larson was around 50% owned at 45.96. So if we made Jimmy Johnson 43, 38, he probably would get in some lineups as well. So you could take either approach. I'm going to take the approach where I just change the points and I just hit optimize lineup. Let's see if Jimmy Johnson ends up popping up into some of these lineups when it refreshes. So now we can see Jimmy Johnson in 22% of lineups, and that's probably a little more than I wanted, but that's okay. We're just doing this as a way to show you guys what to do. Obviously when we're tweaking these things, we've got drivers in certain price ranges will affect drivers in the same price range. So Eric Almirola, 6,100, we've got him at 4% ownership, whereas we have somebody like Chris Buescher, 6,600 at 67% ownership. And Danica, we don't even have owned at all. So I'm going to bump up Eric Almirola's projection and Danica's projection, and you'll watch Chris Buescher and AJ Allmendinger ownership percentages will probably come down. So we need to figure out how much to bump our Almirola and Danica projections up. Well, we can see Buescher's at 60-some% at 29.76. We don't want Danica at 60-some%. We don't want Buescher there either. So we'll eventually lower him, but maybe we put Danica at 26.50 or something like that. And we put Eric Almirola, he should be at a discount to Danica at 25.84. Now let's see what happens. Again, these are just ballpark guesses. I'm going to change Danica to 27. Ballpark guesses, and let's see what happens now when I optimize those lineups. Remember, we did have Allmendinger and Buescher at 69 and 67. Danica and Almirola and Danica 4 and 0. So Almirola now 29, Danica 18. And we can see Allmendinger at 62 instead of 69 and Buescher at 61 instead of 68 or whatever it was. But you get the idea. These lowered a little bit because they were in a similar price range to Danica and Almirola. And that's because of the way the rosters are constructed. You get some expensive guys and then some cheaper guys. So if you're adding in other cheaper drivers, you're taking away from those from the other cheaper drivers in that same range. So that's why we can kind of tweak these things around. Alternatively, you could just limit the exposure if you wanted to AJ Allmendinger. I don't like doing too many maxes and too many mins because then you over-constrain the optimizer and you break it. So we don't like to mess around with max and mins too much, but certainly maybe we just want Allmendinger to be in 50% of our lineups. Remember, he started all the way dead last, but I still think 50% was probably a decent number to be exposed to with him. We said we were going to lower Buescher's projection a tiny bit, and we could see what happens now. So we'll just give that a minute to refresh. I know this is taking a little bit of time. This is just kind of the process you have to go through. And we haven't been recording the video too long, and we're already at the point where we're getting close to some lineups that I would enjoy submitting. I would maybe change, of course, my Brad Keselowski exposure, change my Chase Elliott, Matt Kenseth. I would lower those. And I think we'd be in pretty good shape. So I'm going to just lower Brad Keselowski down to 40. Lower Matt Kenseth down to 40. And I'm going to lower, who else did we say? Chase Elliott down to 41.58. Yeah, we did say Chase Elliott. And hit optimize. We'll just let that run through. And now we have, the point where we Keselowski's down at 39. Kenseth's still at 63. And Larson 83% ownership. So at some point, we're getting closer. If we check our lineups now, our salary range is still 49,100, 49,700. You'll see that as you optimize more and more this way using the points number, your salary ranges will shrink and shrink. That's okay. So at this point, I might want to just start changing to exposures. Maybe I want to limit Brad Keselowski exposure or Matt Kenseth exposure to 40% or something like that. Click Optimize Lineups. Now we've got Matt Kenseth limited to 40%. I could have done it with Larson as well because I wanted Larson around 50%, but I'm going to do that just with the points feature. And I think we'll be good to go. I mean, this is pretty close to optimized. You could continue to tweak this further and further. Obviously, maybe you don't want Buescher at 57 or Eric Jones at 56 or Jimmy Johnson at 51. I think that's kind of wild for Jimmy Johnson there. So I certainly would I would lower that for Jimmy Johnson. But you get the idea. So this is the process you go through, and then very quickly you get to a point where your percentages will be much closer to where you want them to be. I've limited AJ Allmendinger to 50%, Matt Kenseth to 40%, and so it helps some of these other guys pop out. Like when we limited AJ Allmendinger to 50%, then all of a sudden it pulled in more Danica Patrick and Eric Almirola and even some Ty Dillon here, so in the 6,000 range. So you can see how that works. So now we've got some optimized lineups. What do we do with them, right? So we've got lineups that go all the way from 49.2 to 49.7. Maybe I'll make it 49.8. Let's just make it 49.8, re-optimize. This will be our last one. Then we're going to go put them into DraftKings or do what we would to put them into DraftKings. So we've got all these lineups. Now we're going to download them. So we're going to download these lineups, and I'm going to save it and click Open. And you can see we've got our lineups right here. It is in this nice CSV format. You've got all these driver names and their driver ID numbers from DraftKings. And if we go back to DraftKings itself, if you go to the lineups area, there's a spot on the lineups where it says edit entries. So if you go to DraftKings.com/lineup, click edit entries. Then right here, it'll be a spot to download your entries. So I don't have any entries right now because I haven't entered for this weekend and last weekend's races have ended. But there would be a drop down here with whatever contests you're in. If you're in NASCAR, you'd click, you want NASCAR. So you click the NASCAR button and then you click download your lineups and it would download your lineups. So I did that last week and I just downloaded my, let's say 100 of my entries into the $9 contest, the one that was $400,000 this past week. And you can see I just entered a dummy lineup. AJ Allmendinger, Eric Almirola, Chase Elliott, Kevin Harvick, Case Kane, Matt Kenseth was my dummy lineup for all 100 of these lineups. So I have this nice CSV that has 100 lineups that I downloaded from DraftKings, right? I entered 100 contests. So like before the week started last week, I entered 100 contests, $109 entries with the same lineup, just a dummy lineup. And you guys could do that now. As you're watching this video, contests have opened for this weekend. You could enter 100 into whatever contest you want, into a mass multi-entry contest. You could enter 100 or 150 or 50 or 20, and then download the CSV with your dummy lineup. What we're going to do is we're going to replace these drivers with the drivers from our optimizer very easily. I'm just going to select all 100 lineups, copy, come over here and paste. And now we have 100 lineups that we've created with the optimizer. Entry fee $9, contest ID, all that. You don't want to change that. You just want to change the driver area here. And now we've got 100 lineups we can enter right into the big GPP. You would save it. You would come back to DraftKings and you would upload your saved file and it would overwrite your 100 dummy lineups with the 100 lineups you created using the NASCAR DFS optimizer at RotoViz. Obviously with a lot of optimized drivers in there. You can change exposures. You can get rid of all the crappy guys. You can do whatever you want here. This is your call. This is your time to shine. Some of the other things I didn't show, right? You can favorite drivers. So right now, Martin Truex Jr. is down here at only 7% owned. Another easy way to bump him up is just to click favorite, and that'll bump his projection up by 10%. So his projection right now is 44.36. It'll bump his projection up by another 4.44 points. So if I were to optimize lineups, if you take 4.44 plus 44.36, that is 48.8 8 or something like that. So when we come here and it refreshes, we'll see where Truex jumps up to. Truex now is our highest owned driver at 48.8 projected points, so exactly a 10% bump. That might be too much, so we could always say we don't want a 10% bump. We'll take some of that away and so forth, but you get the idea. This is how I like to go about optimizing my lineups using the optimizer. Now, that said, I still like to do some by hand, so I usually do between 50 and 100 with the optimizer, and I do the rest by hand. Obviously, with a 2-hour window to enter lineups, or sorry, to enter your lineups by hand, it's not going to be possible. So you're going to need to use the optimizer if you're going to mass multi-entry. I think that's how the RotoViz subscribers this week will get a bit of an edge, is with the mass multi-entry tool. That'll be ready about 15 to 30 minutes after qualifying ends. We'll definitely have qualifying end about 12:30 Eastern. The race starts at 3 p.m. Eastern. So from 12:30 to about 1 o'clock, I'll be running the model, uploading it to my article, updating the optimizer here, and then hitting go, and it'll be ready for you guys. I'll tweet it out and everything, and it'll be posted as an item in my article that I'll be updating constantly. And then you guys go ahead and use it. So hopefully it doesn't crash. I know we'll probably get a lot of users using it at the same time. The goal is for it to not crash. If you're experiencing some difficulties, just slow down and make 20 at a time or something like that, or make 50 at a time. But yep, good luck this week, everyone. I think the people who use the RotoViz subscription will have a big edge, and especially if you're multi-entering, that's going to be certainly an edge if you're using Optimizer. Make it your process. Don't do exactly everything I did, obviously, because the more you copy what I did, the more a lot of you will probably end up with the same lineups. So 49.8, maybe you hit 49.7 or 49.9, or maybe you choose to do a little more exposures or a little less projection optimizing type stuff. Maybe more favoriting of drivers, different things like that. So make it your own, get it to where you want, and that's going to do it for this edition of RotoViz Live, I guess. It wasn't really live, but that's going to do it for this tutorial on using the NASCAR Optimizer at RotoViz. Thanks, everyone, and good luck this week.